So, a few years back, I directed this music video for this band Super Defense, and one of the things that I wanted in it was all these like scenes of like the band themselves hanging out. And the way that we went about that, rather than like really tightly scripting like what they should be doing, is to essentially create these like scenarios and to let them interact with like each other as they sort of naturally would, and then I would record it almost like documentary style. There wasn't like any sort of action cut kind of like moments for the most part for these parts of the scenes. There was like a couple little scenes where like we were doing specific things, but other than that, like a lot of it was just like them hanging out. So the way we went about that was to essentially like one of our producers, Jenny Coker, called these like locations ahead of time, and she would essentially get approval for us to film there, and then on the day of she would call and confirm right as we were about to go in, and then we would just basically like really in a relaxed way kind of like for instance, like we shot at this diner and so we got approval, and then basically we would go in, we asked to be sat by like these specific windows in the back, and the crew kind of had their own table, and then the band themselves, the cast, like had their own table, and they just like got to like eat and order their food or like whatever, and like as they were sort of like talking and hanging out, I would just like capture the little things, and I feel like it worked out really well in terms of just like getting these like really natural moments from them in a way that like again like tightly scripting that like kind of wouldn't have worked as well. And I feel like that's like a really solid way to work with like non-actors and also maybe actors sometimes. Something that like kind of reminds me of that is a lot of the tips from this book that I read, An Actor's Companion by Seth Barrish, and a lot of the tips that he has in the book are like really pragmatic like acting tips. I read this after the fact. I didn't know of this book beforehand, but I just felt like it was like very related to this sort of like general concept. Like all the tips are sort of broken down in like very, just single pages. But there's this one that I'll read that is titled Really Do It. If you go through the motions of an activity on stage, it feels and looks phony. Whatever you decide to do on stage, make sure you really do it. If you're cleaning, really clean. If you're writing, really write. If you're reading, really read. The difference between faking and really doing a task will be obvious to you and your audience. I really like that. And I also, I don't know how to say it better. I really like that conceptually. Like, for me, the idea of like doing something over trying to elicit a specific emotion like is really appealing. Like even when it comes to scripting and writing, I have a note in Obsidian where I keep a bunch of notes about things that you can't fake on film. And I have like this long list, and the idea of it for me is just like when you have like a scene or a scenario, adding in something that like kind of just has to be real on some level. You can check the box. It's like hypothetically, if a character's supposed to feel sad and, whatever, there's some story element, they're feeling devastated. It's like shooting that, it's like, oh, did you capture the thing? Do they seem devastated or not? And it's like it's a little more ambiguous whether you got that on film. But if you're just like, oh, like they need to pick up this thing and do this like these actions, then it's like you can always capture the action. And like to me, having some flexibility and variability on like what the emotional response is, because like the other thing too is like when you show up on the day and like, okay, someone's supposed to feel sad in a scene, but they don't feel sad. It's like, okay, well, like, what is the overall thing about this scene? It's like when we're feeling sad or when we're feeling like angry or something, it doesn't always look the same and for every person. And oftentimes I feel like a real response is more appealing, even if it's not the exact emotional response that you were looking for. Another thing with this whole like setting a scenario for characters, and like I think part of why this worked so well in like the music video, for instance, was just that these people knew each other and like were already friends. And so if there's things like that that you can like utilize in any way, I think that goes like a long way to reading on screen. As like, I mean, obviously like people that, that's the whole reason why certain actors like might hang out before a shoot, or like why people have rehearsals, like is to like garner like a rapport. But if you have people who already know each other, there's sort of like that built in. And I like I think that's pretty like invaluable. But anyway, that's just sort of a little, yeah, I don't know. I think about that from time to time, and just like, especially for like low budget filmmakers, and you're just trying to find ways of like doing things that like look compelling, and that whole idea of like scene setting rather than like dictating like a bunch of specific actions within a scene, I think is like a good little tip. Anyway, see ya. Bye.